Hi there, my name is Signe Darpinian, licensed marriage family therapist at My Way, a mindful and intuitive eating center in the East Bay, California. The following video was filmed at Rancho La Puerta, a spa in Tecate, Mexico, in January 2011, and the video is about learning how to regulate emotions in ways other than food. Hope you have some great takeaways to get started, and we hope to hear from you soon.
I'm going with that. That's the anatomy of a fat thought, okay? And any questions about that? Yeah, no. Okay, so can somebody give me an example sometime recently? I know it's kind of hard at the ranch because we shouldn't really have, we probably don't have a whole lot of external stressors, like external or internal stressors. You might, I never know, but people are probably getting well rested, and I don't know, there might be situational things happening. So maybe not so much in the last few days, but can you think of one kind of recently where you may have used a problem behavior or like a foodie behavior? And what I'm kind of getting at here is that if you and I, so what I'll do with a client is they'll come in. They'll basically come in and I'll have them do a behavioral chain analysis. This is what this is, okay? You're always kind of thinking about when you're really foodie, like, oh my gosh, I'm eating without hunger. Foodie. Typically, you kind of, it takes you a while to kind of figure out why, but you always want to kind of be looking backward, like, what's going on? Oh, okay, first of all, I'm really tired, and then this thing happened, my mother-in-law called, and then I was eating, oh, I get it. So you just want to kind of continue to cultivate this curiosity about why you're doing what you're doing with food, and then eventually that causes a change. And then you'd be really aware. So like I said, on Christmas, when I was feeding tired, I was very aware of what I was doing. I was like, whoa, I'm just eating all day long, and I could tell that I was tired and I couldn't take a nap. Okay, so I knew what I was doing. It lasted a day. I didn't look back. No big. Okay, so what I do is if a client comes in, I'll have them do a behavioral chain analysis with me. We'll talk about a foodie time that week, and we'll work this together. And then what I do, obviously, they're going to be the ones who can help me figure out what is the target behavior here. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know the target behavior, and if I trust that somebody knows themselves better than I know them, which is usually almost always 100% the case, okay? If I talk to them about, like, what is the target behavior? So by target behavior, I mean, what is the behavior that if you tackled it, it would create the most amount of change, okay? So a diet's like, well, the problem behavior is the food. You're eating too much. You ate over however many calories. The food's the problem. Well, gosh, if we tackle that and we don't address any of these issues here, this will not ever stay changed. It has nothing to do with food. Food is just an end result. It's just like a side effect, okay? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So then you think of one other metaphor. I heard this at a talk, and I thought it was really pretty brilliant. If you think of your emotional eating, so again, I'm defining emotional eating. It doesn't have to be a great, big, huge emotion. It could just be bored. It could be whatever, okay? It could be big. It could be small. Emotional eating I'm defining as any time that you're eating in a way that is not in response to your physiological cues. So you're eating and you're even at a 6 or a 7. There is no hunger. That's emotional eating, okay? So let's say that let's use the metaphor of a house of cards, okay? And let's say that the house of cards represents your emotional eating, all right? And say you're in a therapy session with me, and you and I are trying to figure out what are the structural pieces maintaining the symptom. So you want to kind of think of what are the bottom cards. You and I aren't going to mess around with the top card. We're trying to bring the house down. Okay? We're trying to interrupt this emotional eating pattern. If we take off, so in my opinion, food has to get addressed, obviously, but food is like a top card. So if I take off the top card, the house is not going to come down. So we're figuring out what are the few structural pieces maintaining the symptom. So for some people, it could be things that you just can't even imagine. So for quite a few women that come into my caseload, the inability to speak truth could be one of the structural pieces maintaining the symptom. So, they're kind of in the habit of saying, and especially the younger women in my caseload, they're kind of, trying to figure out assertiveness and speaking truth, and their self-esteem is still a little, rough. And so they're kind of saying, they're typically saying yes to things that they want to be saying no to. And so there's this constant kind of dysregulation, this kind of, just to throw out a fancy word, intrapsychic conflict, okay? So anytime you have intrapsychic conflict, you're more likely to use a behavior communication like food. Whereas if you're speaking truth, which means a whole lot of things, it means that you feel like you're worth being heard, that your voice matters. If you're speaking truth in a way that's honoring the person you're talking to as well as yourself, your food isn't going to get hit. It doesn't really have much of a reason. It can just be used really weird. Okay, primary emotion of anxiety comes up. Okay, you pull in a behavior that pushes it down. What it does is the behavior in the moment that you're using it. Okay, so in the moment that you're eating the cookies, and yours is such a good example because you're getting no pleasure from the cookies at all. You're like, oh my gosh, my son is driving, it's really snowing. What it does is it works in the moment that it's working. It works in the moment that you're eating the cookies.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? So it has a very shortened state of well-being. It doesn't have a prolonged state of well-being.
Right.
And so it works in that very moment, and then that's probably what led to the eating more because
exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
So then the minute that you stop eating your gingerbread cookie, the reason why you're eating the gingerbread cookie without hunger comes up. Okay, so then you're like, I better eat another.
Which I'm then not aware of. So
yes,
I eat
exactly.
another cookie.
Exactly. So remember what we were saying the first night. I love the phrase, you can't ever get enough of what you don't actually need in the first place. Okay, so yeah, that's a perfect example. Yeah.
So if you, in that case, in your case, if she's about to eat the cookie and she's like, you know what, I'm going to eat this cookie and I know I don't want it. What in that moment can you do to stop the behavior?
Okay, so what you can do in that moment, and if you, so what you decide to do depends on how high the anxiety is also, okay? So if you had to rate your anxiety in that moment on a scale of 1 to 100%, what would you say?
70.
Okay, it sounds like a 70. Okay, so if it's a 70 and it's not like 100%, okay, because if it is 100, if you're more in like crisis emergence emotion with your anxiety, then the thing that you would do is, first of all, let it come up, and this is what we were talking about, you know, when they study emotions at behavioral tech, and emotion really shouldn't last much longer than 20 to 60 seconds at a time, okay, so primary emotion comes up, it's typically the secondary response, your thoughts about that emotion coming up that would cause it to last longer, okay, so say her primary emotion comes up and it's in a 70, if it was higher, she would want to engage in something that would jump her out of it if she's deciding to not communicate about it, so say she wants to ride through her anxiety. It would mean that we'd have to kind of ramp it up, and if she had an iPod, okay, and there was really upbeat music that that is hard to sort of pay attention to what's currently going on when she's listening to this music, that would be an example of a distress tolerance technique. So how charged you are determines which skill set you're going to use. Okay, so if it's big, you're going to pull in something that will jump you out of it temporarily. And of course you don't want to stay jumped out of your emotional state. You don't want to constantly put it on the shelf, but in the moment it can help to kind of put it on the shelf, engage in a behavior that takes you out, and then when you've de-escalated a little bit, return to it. But she's saying it's 70%, okay, so that's somewhat manageable. So the first thing, no matter how high it is just to kind of hang out with it long enough. So emotions are indicators that there's a need. They're helpful. That's why we have them. So you hang out long enough to identify what it is, okay, so in the labeling of it accurately, it de-escalates it quite a bit, like, okay, there's a feeling of anxiety in me right now, okay? So if it's manageable and she's deciding to not speak truth about it, okay, or to say, not like, you're deciding like, this is what it is. My son needs to learn how to drive and I'm going to, you know.
Right, I didn't in that moment acknowledge it at all.
Right.
Like, I just stuffed it.
Right, and then, you know, usually there's a really quick, so basically if you hang out long enough to just kind of figure out what it is, which it shouldn't take long, right? So then if possible, you want to think about, like we were saying yesterday, creating space between you and the action of non-hunger eating. So hang out in the uncomfortableness of it, okay? See if you'll probably feel a pull toward the food and you know what you're doing and why. And you have a couple of choices of what you can do. So if it's a more mild emotion, you can pull out a mindfulness activity. So you could do, and it depends on how well versed you are in that practice, okay? So if you're doing quiet mind on a regular basis, meditation, breath work, you could do, you know, like 6 deep breaths and just quieting the mind, you know, and focus on your breath. You could do a mindful looking out the window and being distracted by the scenery, you know, so it kind of depends on what you have available to you. So that would be a mindfulness technique that you pull in to create that space, okay? So basically what you're trying to do is make it over the hump of non-hunger eating. And typically, unless you're in a really charged state where it feels like the food is running you and you're not running the food, sometimes it's going to feel like that. Typically, that making it over the hump is usually a few minutes. So if you can hang out with it long enough, and in the beginning too, remember it's just the awareness. So if you're able to create that space between you and the action of eating without hunger, even for a couple minutes, and that's something different from what you've done, even if you decide to eat the gingerbread cookies, that is a change. You see what I'm saying? And intuitive eating looks like that. There are these teeny tiny little changes that eventually add up to an entirely different way of eating, as you know. So it's like these small increments of change really lay the foundation, for a really solid foundation. So does that make sense? So you want to kind of catch yourself doing something right. You're like, cool. Gosh, normally I'd have the anxiety, not even recognize it's there, immediately start eating and then heading off to a fat thought and I've got to lose weight. And so if you can, you're like, oh, this is uncomfortable, and you eat, you're like, all right, I know what I'm doing. If you can do it with a non-judgmental stance, and eventually you're going to see a change in the actual action of the food.